connection was intermittent the last time that we met, and recorded discussion would give you a clearer explanation of the things we discussed last meeting. So we have Dayan Dayag and friends. Okay, we have Dayan Dayag and friends. They are in one house, no? Whose house is that, Dayan? Okay.
Sir, office po ni Sir Aldrin.
Oh, this is Sir Alvin. Why are you there?
Hi,
Okay.
Sir,
sir.
nag-encode po sa...
Then may I request everyone to please put on your camera. Then may now start our discussion with an opening prayer.
Bawal yan, Jake.
Oo. Ian, I hope that next meeting, black ang buhok mo. Okay. So, we have our opening prayer. Please take note that the closing prayer was well delivered yesterday. Personal prayer was well delivered yesterday. So I would expect that the one I'm calling the opening prayer will also be to personal prayer, our prayer today. And because Dayan is in Sir Alvin's office, may we request Dayan's company, Dayan's friend, the one in Checkered, to lead us with the opening prayer.
We thank you, Lord, for everything you have done for us. And all this we ask through your name and through your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. In the name of the Father,
Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So again, thank you for making yourself available for today's meeting. So last meeting we finished our discussion on the key concepts, okay, as regards lesson 2, okay, and we clearly, okay, with your questions and with the exchange of thoughts and ideas we had last meeting, we finally cleared out the definition of these key concepts in assessment, particularly the meaning of tests, non-tests, testing, measuring, assessment, and of course, evaluation. And we ended with a very good story as regards the difference between assessment and evaluation. And we said that assessment, the one who benefits from assessment are the assessees themselves. Meaning to say, okay, the students themselves benefit, okay, on the assessment that teachers would be doing in class, because it's through these assessment strategies that learners could be able to improve their performance, their learning performance or academic performance in a certain course or in a certain subject. While evaluation is important because the evaluation will provide us a judgment whether the student academically progressed or there was change in the student when it comes to academic achievement or academic progress. So today we will be dealing specifically with the details of what assessment is, considering that this course is about assessment of learning 1. Hence, it is a must that we need to clarify details about assessment, about this key concept on assessment. Okay. Now, before we proceed to our formal discussion on the details as regards assessment, maybe we just call one student from class to share, okay, to share a summary, should I say, a summary of what transpired from our discussion yesterday. And because And because Jamel, okay, Jamel has to, Jamel has to cope up with the sharing of learning takeaway that he needs, may we get a word from Jomel, okay, maybe a short summary, a brief summary of, or a summary, should I say, of the lesson from last meeting's discussion. May we then welcome Jomel to share to us a summary of, or a brief statement as regards what he learned from last meeting's discussion.
Hello, sir.
Yes, Jomel?
Yes, sir. Uh, Let me state this beautiful phrase, sir. In last discussions, sabi po kahapon na assessment doesn't have to be a written exam. So
Yeah.
it means that there are many ways, and the teacher or the educator must not only focus in a single perspective, but teachers should successfully learn something that there are many different ways or there are various ways to assess learning
Yeah.
and to determine if the learner achieve the outcomes or the learning outcomes or successfully learn something in the in all the discussions. So that is what I have learned last discussions or yesterday, that there are that the teacher should not only focus on the written exams but also look at other ways or look on various ways or different ways to assess the learning process.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
that is well said, Chomel, and I think that's the big idea which we realized from yesterday's discussion, because we made mention that we should not just content ourselves as teachers in using a single form of assessment, but we have to make use of varied assessment tools, varied assessment strategies to also cater to student diversity. And if we do that, then that would mean also that we consider the kind of learners that we have inside our classroom. Because not everyone else is good at the same, not everyone else, okay, not everyone else is good in a single skill or in a single potential. But we have, our students do have different potentials, our students do have different skills, our students do have different intelligences, and because of these differences, that we as teachers should make use of varied assessments. So thank you, Jomel. That will already be your learning takeaway for three. Okay, three. Okay, because you miss the video conference. Okay, because of a very important event in your local church. Okay, so thank you, Jomel, for sharing that big idea, that big statement from our yesterday's discussion. Okay, then, so I think there are no more questions, or there are no more clarificatory questions as regards these key concepts. We maybe then now move to our discussion as regards the details of assessment. So allow me to share my entire screen. Okay. So we now proceed to assessment 4 as end of learning. Okay. Please take note that as we have said in our discussion as regards outcomes-based education, we said that there was a shift from input-based or content-based educational model to outcomes-based educational model. And this shift would mean also that teaching or education has to shift from students being from teachers being the knowledge bearers to teachers being the knowledge guides. This is the same with in input or content-based education. Learning is teacher-centered. Okay? While in outcomes-based education, teaching or learning is learner-centered. If learning is teacher-centered, then that would mean that the sole bearers of knowledge are the teachers themselves. But when we say teachers are knowledge guides, then that would mean that teachers are merely facilitators of learning. Remember that we are in a knowledge society. And as we are in a knowledge society, then that would mean that information are instant, information are instantaneous, information can just be accessed by our students anywhere else, especially with the presence of the internet. Okay? And because of the knowledge society that we have now, and because of the instant information that anybody can just have an access of, okay, through the internet, then that would mean that we are no longer as teachers, we are no longer the sole provider of knowledge, the sole bearer of knowledge, but students do also have their own knowledge as regards the things that we are discussing in class. Hence, our role now in the outcomes-based education is merely to facilitate learning, to facilitate our students' understanding. And we can only do this if we make use of the different forms of assessment or different forms of assessing, of looking, okay, of monitoring the kind of learning that our students are having in our respective classes. Hence, this lesson, this presentation on assessment for, as, and of learning. Okay, again, the biggest statement, teachers have to shift from being the knowledge bearers to knowledge guides in the 21st century education. According to Dr. Rhonda Dubek, okay, there are 3 parts of assessment. Hence, her proposal on the 3-part assessment model. Now, before we discuss the 3-part assessment model, okay, the 3-part assessment model that we are referring here is assessment as learning, assessment for learning, and assessment of learning. Later, we will learn the differences of these 3-part assessment model as proposed by Dr. Rhonda Dubek. Now, we also have to reflect first on this passage from Dylan William in his book, Embedding Formative Assessment, Practical Techniques for K-12 Classrooms. Dylan Williams said, most of what our students need to know hasn't been discovered or invented yet. Learning how to learn used to be an optional extra in education. Today, it's a survival skill. Learning how to learn is already the new learning in the 21st century education. It's no longer the what's of learning, but it's already the house of learning that we need to imbibe among our learners. Because every day, we are learning new things. And we cannot learn new things unless we know how to learn. Okay? Araw-araw ay oportunidad para matuto. Ngunit hindi tayo matututo ng mga bagong bagay sa buhay kung hindi muna natin matutunan kung paanong matuto. This was according to Dylan William. It's learning how to learn. So I mean to say, input-based education focused on the what's of learning. But for the outcomes-based education, learning focuses on the hows of learning. Paano ang matuto ng tama? Dahil nga, ang mga impormasyon at kaalaman ay maaaring makuha sa internet. At dahil nga sa pangyayaring ito na naging madali ang pagkuha ng kaalaman, naging madali ang pagkuha ng impormasyon, na dapat lamang na mga guro ay turuan kung paano matuto ang mga mag-aaral gamit ang mga impormasyong ito na madaling makuha. Okay? Now, we proceed to the definition of this three-part model of assessment. What is assessment for? What is assessment as learning? And what is assessment of learning? And of course, after we define this three-part model of assessment, we also have to check the purpose of each form of this assessment. And number 3, we also check the scope, okay, of assessment. And last, we also look at the method on how to use these forms of assessment. And we also have the 5th one, we look into the quality, meaning to say how to ensure that assessment is of value. And number 6, utilization, how to use the assessment information. And number 7, the role, what functions should teachers do when they are to make use of assessment as learning, assessment of learning, assessment for learning. And 8, strategies, what are examples of assessment tasks for each form of assessment. So again, these are the things that we will be looking into in this presentation: strategies, role, quality, utilization. We have method, scope, definition, and purpose. So those are the 8 important things that we will be looking into in this presentation. Okay. Dylan William, in his book Embedded Formative Assessment, also mentioned this, that feedback functions formatively only if the information fed back to the learner is used by the learner in improving performance. Assessment is a very important element of the teaching and learning process. And part of assessment are the quality feedback we provide to our students. And feedback is of quality if these bits of feedback are used by our learners to improve their learning performance, to improve their academic performance. Okay? So we stop the sharing because parang nakikinita po na may mga gustong magtanong at mayroong gustong magbahagi sa klase. Okay, dun sa initial first few slides. You might want to add something. You might want to share your realization as regards what has been presented in the few slides. Okay? Anyone?
Sir.
Yes, you listen to Princess. Princess, please put on your camera so that we can see you while you are sharing.
Ano po, sir?
Okay, sige. Princess, yung book mo ba may kulay?
Wala po, black.
Akala ko. Baka tatakpan mo yung kalahati.
Hindi po. Ano, sir? In every assessment, we should give feedback, quality feedback. Para po para malaman natin, ulit, sir. Nalito na ako. Okay, so in every assessment, we should give quality feedback para para ma-ensure natin na ma-ensure na merong improvement sa academic performance ng student.
Okay, that's a good sharing. Okay, that's also a support to the statement provided by Dylan Williams when he said that feedback has to be utilized by our students to improve their performance. Okay, sinasabi din yan na ang talagang kompetensya ng estudyante ay hindi yung kanyang classmate, hindi yung kanyang kamag-aral, kundi yung kanyang nakaraang performance sa klase. Okay? Any more sharing? Thank you, Princess, for that wonderful sharing. How about the others? You might want to share.
Hello, sir.
Yes, Mar.
Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes, Mar.
Everyone, yeah. To support what Dr. Dylan William, right?
Yeah.
Dylan William said that learning how to learn is a surviving skill in this 21st century, or chimpi, or means na this very time. This is a surviving skill. Learning how to learn is an important skill that me and my classmates, or every learners today, that needs to do and to understand and first, and to it is because there are available resources. It is provided na, and it's up for the students kung gagamitin niya o hindi. And learning how means he or she ito, gusto niya i-increase yung capacity niya to learn, and para magamit niya sa in real life situation. And during this pandemic, everything goes online. And that one of the challenges, no? Pero sabi ko nga, everything, maraming resources na pwedeng gamitin. And dapat maintindihan natin na merong, maraming time, and we should not be idle na matuto. Kasi may mga resources na, and learning how to learn will propel us sa ating future workplace and yung gagawin natin sa buhay. That's my realization.
Yeah, I totally agree with your realization, Mar, that everything has already been provided for us. No, with the online thing now, if you would like to know about something, if you would like to know about this concept, you just have to Google it. No, the Google term is now used as a verb, okay, because everything is provided already, and it's already up to us on how to utilize all these resources for us to learn. And I perfectly agree with the statement of Mar. I think everyone should also realize this, that the online learning modality is actually not a hindrance for learning, but actually it's an opportunity to learn more, to even advance ourselves, to even advance the things that we are learning, okay, from the teachers. Because the teachers are merely guide on how we are supposed to make use of these resources. Okay? Ang kailangan lang ninyo ngayon ay gabay kung paano gamitin ang mga ito. Okay, yun na lang ang role ng mga teachers ngayon, because everything is provided. And as I've said, I hope that Mar's thinking is also the same with others' thinking. Kasi magandang pag-iisip yung sinasabi niya, na napakaganda pag-iisip yung sinasabi ni Mar, na lahat naman na ay nandiyan. Lahat ng mga kailangan natin ay nandiyan. Nasa sa atin na kung paano gamitin ang mga ito para lalo pa nating malinang, at para lalo pa tayong magpursigi sa ating pag-aaral para sa ating kabubuti. Okay, so these are things that we need to realize as learners in the online learning modality. Thank you, Mar, for sharing that out. Any more sharing?
Sir?
Yes, Bernadette. We listen first to Bernadette, and after Bernadette, we listen to Yan. Yes, Bernadette?
Clear po? Clear po ba?
Yes, Bernadette.
Ayun po, yung natutunan ko po is yung feedback po is one way din po yun, or one way din po yun para mas makita ng estudyante na meron siyang improvement, nakikita niya yung resulta ng ginagawa niya. Tapos, ayun po, na merong yung mga effort niya is may resulta, and then ito din po yung ways para mas ma-encourage yung estudyante na mas mag-improve pa and to learn more. Halimbawa po kapag sinabi ng teacher na magaling ka, or yung grades niya is maayos, ganun po, is tumataas. Ay, galingan ko pa kasi mataas yung grades ko, sabi ni teacher is ganito, kaya gagalingan ko pa. Mga ganung example po.
Yeah, that's
Ang effect po ng feedback po sa mga estudyante.
Yeah, I think your example is perfectly said, Bernadette. And really, feedback or bits of feedback are really very important to help our learners, okay, to help our learners improve their performance. But of course, we also have to teach our learners that not all bits of feedback have to be positive. Okay, but of course later in our discussion, you will be taught on how to design, okay, constructive or descriptive feedback that our students would certainly use to improve the way they perform in our respective classes. Okay, later there's a separate discussion as regards that. Thank you, Bernadette. Now, may we listen last to share. We have Dayan. Dayan, please.
Sir, yung addition lang po doon sa sinabi ni Kuya Mar na since learning resources is kailangan natin dapat maging credible din po dapat yung mga kinukuha natin since kasi meron pong kwento yung teacher namin noon na yung source daw po na tinuro niya sa estudyante niya is mali po.
Yeah.
Kasi nakuha niya lang sa internet yun. So dapat po bilang estudyante at bilang teacher, dapat alam po natin yung credible ng information na kinukuha natin.
Yes, and the use of credible information should first be demonstrated by teachers. Okay, because we cannot guide our students. That's very true, Dayan. We cannot really guide our students well if we ourselves, teachers, are not making use of credible sources. That is our role. That's why we are called knowledge guides. Because we need to guide our students on how they are supposed to evaluate resources or references for true learning, for deeper learning, for correct learning. Okay? For example, meron akong kilala na teacher na sabi niya sa mga estudyante niya, you refer from Wikipedia. Well, in fact, Wikipedia is not a good reference. Okay? Wikipedia is not supposed to be used as a reference when you do your lessons, when you do a learning task, when you define a certain concept, because Wikipedia has been invented as a learning strategy, because that is an open site where anyone else can just edit the information. So if that is an open site and anybody can just edit the information being provided by that Wikipedia, then that is not a good source or a good reference for the content, for the learning content. Okay? That's right. Kaya nga nandun tayo, nagabayan sila. Kaya nga sabi natin, technology can never replace teachers. Because teachers would always be there. The primary role of teachers now in a technologically based learning, okay, are their wisdom as regards what is supposed to be believed in from all this information, from all these sites where information are being referred to or referred from. Okay, thank you, Dayan, for sharing that out. That's really a good sharing. Okay, so may we now continue our discussion. Thank you for Princess, Mar, Bernadette, and Dayan for sharing those things out. We will welcome other sharers later as we post, okay, every after few slides of discussion. Okay, we now proceed to the first concept, or to the first part of this presentation, particularly on the definition of assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment of learning. First thing off. Dari mo. Berdua mo na to ah. May 200 ka dyan. Mali, dalihan mo na lang 10 pesos. Okay. Now we proceed now to the definition, as I have said a while back, of this three-part assessment model. So, when we say assessment for learning, this part of the assessment provides the basis for providing descriptive feedback for students and deciding on groupings, instructional strategies, and resources. So anything that anything that we say or anything that we do to allow our learners improve their understanding of the learning content fall under assessment for learning. So when you group students into teams, when you ask students to do a group activity, a group or a team activity, that is assessment for learning. If you make use of certain strategies to teach the lesson, then the strategies may serve as assessment for learning. If you provide learners with the necessary resources for them to learn better, then these are examples of assessment for learning. If you said to a student, I really love your answer because you clearly provided a perfect example for that concept you just have defined, then that word, that comment is an example of descriptive feedback. And descriptive feedback is a type or an example of assessment for learning. Okay? So, the learning conversation that we are doing, the sharing of learning takeaway that we are doing, the worksheets that you need to complete as a team, these are all examples of assessment for learning. Because it's through these activities that you are being helped out, okay, towards better understanding of the concepts we discussed in class. That is assessment for learning. Now, how about assessment as learning? It is through this process that students are able to learn about themselves as learners and become aware of how they learn, become metacognitive. It's learning about themselves. That's metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about thinking. When you think about the way you think, that is metacognition. If you know your learning style, you are aware of the way you learn better, you are aware of your personal learning strategies, you can reflect your own understanding, and you do reflection sessions for you to check whether you have understood the concept clearly or not. These are examples of assessment as learning. Okay? Your metacognitive ability or your knowledge of your own thought processes form part of this part of assessment as learning. So self-assessment, okay? Self-assessment is a common term when we say assessment as learning. Okay, that's about metacognition. While assessment of learning, it is the assessment that becomes public and results in statements or symbols about how well students are learning. It often contributes to pivotal decisions that will affect students' future. So when we say assessment of learning, we're referring to your grades, because they are written in cards, the report cards. Okay, we're referring to major examinations. We're referring to a certain score, a certain quantitative measure that represent, okay, or a symbolic measure that represent your progress, your academic progress in class. So it's already the end result. That is assessment of learning. Okay? When you say pivotal decisions, for example, maraming bumagsak sa quiz. So quiz is an example of assessment of learning. Okay? So meaning to say, Assessment for learning, we are referring to formative assessments. Assessment as learning, we're referring to self-assessment. While assessment of learning, we're referring to summative assessment. Okay? Clear? We stop. Okay, we stop the sharing so that you will be entertained to ask clarificatory questions. Sige. Any question as regards the differences or the definition of formative assessment, self-assessment, and summative assessment? Yeah, any question?
Sir?
Yes, we listen to Joshua. Joshua,
Sure.
please.
Sir, pwede po ba magbigay ng examples?
Sige, magbigay tayo ng example. Yung sinabi ko kanina, di ba, may examples na ako. Okay, sige, pero magbigay pa tayo ng example. Okay. Formative assessment. Okay. I'll ask questions during our discussion now. I am asking questions, okay, to class to check whether you are correctly understanding or you are getting the definition of these concepts correctly. And that strategy of asking you questions in the duration or while we are discussing the lesson is an example of formative assessment. Okay. Another example of formative assessment. We pause for a while, every after 3 slides of the discussion. Then I ask you to work in pair, okay? To share your understanding to a pairmate or to a classmate. That is think, pair, share. That is an example. That is instructional strategy, but that is an example of formative assessment. Okay. Now, someone asked or raised a question. And he said, "Sir, please confirm if I have understood correctly the definition you have provided." Again, someone in class suddenly raises his hand and asks the teacher, "Sir, please confirm if I just have correctly understood, okay, the concept or the definition you provided." If I correctly understood, because you are asking, okay, about the way you have understood the concept, that is an example of self-assessment or assessment as learning. Then after discussing this lesson, I ask you to take the quiz. The quiz scores, the quiz itself is an example of summative assessment or assessment of learning. Major exam is an example of assessment of learning. Your final grade, prelim grades, okay, midterm grade, these are examples of assessment of learning.
Thank you po, sir. Okay po, sir.
Okay? Klaro yung pagkakaiba ng tatlo. So meaning to say, thank you, Joshua, meaning to say, these, okay, if we are to make use of this 3-part assessment model, then that would mean that assessment is ongoing. Assessment is continuous. Because we make use of assessment while we are discussing the lesson or even prior discussing the lesson, while we are, an assessment also being used by the students for their own benefit, and assessment also after discussing the lesson. This is an example. This is what we mean by ongoing assessment or continuous assessment. Even diagnostic assessment is an example of assessment for learning because it prepares you towards the summative assessment. Okay? Sige, magbigay kayo ng learning tasks na pinapagawa sa inyo ng mga teachers niyo, then we will classify. I'll classify whether it is assessment of, for, or as. So yung ginagawa natin na I'm giving you the opportunity, okay, to ask questions. This is an example of instructional strategy under formative assessment. Yes. Jennifer, hindi ko marinig ading pop. Check your speaker. Jennifer, hindi ko marinig. You check your speaker, Jen. Yeah, anyone? Okay. Jennifer, ready na ba yung speaker mo?
Sir, narinig niyo daw po ba si Jennifer?
Hindi namin siya marinig.
Ako na lang. Sir, dito na lang ako since I'm with Diane, sir.
Sige, diyan ka na. Nandiyan ka ba kay Dayan?
Yes, sir.
Bahay ba kayo?
Sir,
Yes, sir.
nandito po kami sa office ni Sir Alvin, sir.
Okay, sige. Jennifer.
Sir, doon po sa kapag every time po since the beginning, no? Sir, sa recap, sir, saan po siya included dun sa tatlong assessment for learning, assessment as learning, or assessment of learning?
Lesson, summary ng lesson.
Yes, sir.
Part pa rin siya ng depende sa pagkagamit niya. Kailan niya pinagawa?
Before mag-start yung class, sir,
That is still under formative assessment.
okay, sir.
That is still under formative assessment to check your understanding. And
Okay,
to prepare you for, kasi ang assessment, ang summative kasi, it involves scoring. Okay? It involves scoring, and at the same time, it's conducted as a culminating activity of a lesson chapter or a certain unit of study. That is a format. That is summative assessment. If yung recap is used, okay, to introduce the lesson or to connect the new lesson to the previous lesson, then that is still part of formative assessment.
Thank you po, sir. Sir, so dun sa sir, sa assessment for learning, ito po yung mga since kasaling strategies, yun po yung mga pwedeng gawin sa mga students to parang maano yung learnings nila, sir, ganyan ba?
To prepare them
Okay, sir.
for the summative assessment. So anything that we do to prepare our learners for summative assessment, like quizzes, major exam, major requirement, or all these things, okay, towards a good grade, all these things are formative assessment.
Okay, sir.
Anything that we do to prepare are formative assessment strategies. Okay, so thank you, Jennifer, for clarifying that out. How about the others?
Sir, may tanong si Jomel sa chat box po.
Sino? Ay, si Jom, kasi mahina daw internet niya. Okay, si Jomel. Sabi niya, sir, mahina net ko. Self-assessment is not mostly observed on students or learners. Then what strategy and teachers should do to promote self-assessment among the students because it's beneficial in such a way that it helps in enriching learning? Yeah, if your teachers would ask you to write a reflection paper, that is actually a very good strategy for self-assessment. Because in a reflection paper, you just have to share your own understanding about the question. That is an example of self-assessment. Okay? Another example to promote self-assessment. Okay? Yun. To provide an opportunity for students, okay, to ask questions every after we discuss the lesson by using a prompt, by using an unfinished sentence. For example, yung sabi ko kanina, Sir, am I right when I say blah, 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 blah. The use of I statements, okay, in class, okay, is an example of self-assessment or promotion of metacognition of our learners. Another example of promoting metacognition of learners. When you ask, for example, learners to do a summary of the lesson, and you allow them to be free on whatever medium will they use, okay, to provide a summary of the lesson. For example, if Princess is good at singing, then Princess will compose a jingle about the summary of the lesson. If Mar is good at dancing, then Mar will be given a chance to dance out the summary of the lesson. If Kathleen is good at essay writing, then Kathleen will write an essay to summarize the discussion. That is an example of a strategy to promote a self-assessment. Because only learners know what unique skill they can use, okay, to show what they have learned in class. That is still an example of self-assessment or promotion of metacognition. Okay, because they know better. Learners know better on how they are supposed to learn. They know their own learning styles. They know how they are to understand the concepts. Okay, we have different strategies in doing those. In math, for example, if you would ask learners to solve the problem even without using the formula you have taught them, they have to make use of their own formula, then that is promotion of self-assessment. Because students are taught on how to solve problems while they devise their own formula in solving or identifying the correct answer for a certain problem. These are all examples, okay, to promote metacognition in class. Okay, Jomel? Jomel?
Sir, thank you, sir.
Oo. So, ganun yun. Napakahalaga, tama ka naman, napakahalaga talaga ng pagtatasa, okay? Pagtatasa bilang pagkatuto o bilang pagkatuto ng mga mag-aaral. Did you not experience all these things, yung assessment as learning in your respective classes? Ha?
Kasi ihalo mo sa puso.
Yes, Daya. Sino yun? Dayan, sino yung salita? Okay. You ask Sir Alvin. If I'll ask you difficult questions, you ask Sir Alvin to help you out to answer the question. Sir Alvin has been a very good student when he was in college. Dayan. Okay. Sige. Any more question?
Sure.
Yes, Joshua.
Sir, sir, yung sa CFED, sir, kapag gagawa kami ng self-reflection pagkatapos ng mass, self-assessment pa ba yun, sir?
Yes, that is self-assessment. Because you are sharing what you have learned from the homily, di ba? Your own understanding of the homily. That's an example of self-assessment. Basta any reflection papers that you write, okay, reflection papers are examples of strategies under assessment as learning or self-assessment. Joshua. Sabi ni Jude, Sir, which among the three assessments is the best for the students' learning? In the 21st century teaching and learning, in the outcomes-based education, continuous assessment is the best assessment. And when they say continuous assessment, we are referring to the three forms or three-part assessment model: formative, self, and summative assessment. Okay? To make it even more better, or more na better pa, no? To make it even more helpful, okay, for student learning, we also add authentic assessment. Later, we will discuss about authentic assessments.
Sir,
Yes, Cesar May.
Sir, ngayon pong nasa distant learning tayo, ano po yung mas madalas nagagamit sa tatlong yun?
Ngayon sa distance learning, usually ang nagagamit ay formative and depending sa subject Okay, we cannot answer whether which of these parts of assessment are commonly used in distance learning. But ideally, these three parts have to be used. Ideally. Pero ang nakikita ko ngayon with online learning, usually nakakalimutan natin ang self-assessment. Okay? Mas marami ang summative assessment kumpara kay formative assessment. Pero there is still formative assessments. Pero yun nga lang, yung sa degree ng pagkagamit na nakikita ko, mas maraming gumagamit doon sa formative assessment, sa summative assessment than formative assessment. Least o konti lang ang gumagamit ng self-assessment. Pero of course, sabi nga natin, if we really would like to give quality learning to our students, to our learners, then as much as possible, we have to make use of continuous assessment. Usually, kulang tayo sa paggamit ng feedback. Pansin nyo sa online learning, may mga teachers ba sa inyo na nagbibigay ng feedback dun sa scores ninyo? May mga teachers ba na gumagamit ng gradebook kaagad-agad, ini-scorean yung mga work niyo kaagad-agad para malaman niyo yung score niyo para alam niyo kung ano pang improve next time? Usually feedback ang kulang din sa distance learning. Hirap na hirap ang mga estudyante. There's a dearth of feedback from teachers when it comes to distance learning. Kasi talagang mahirap din magbigay ng descriptive feedback.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any more question?
Sir, ako po.
Yes.
Tanong lang.
Captain mo na. After Captain is Daphne. Yes.
Sir, sabi mo po kasi kanina yung assessment for learning or yung formative assessment, i-example nun is parang yung ginagawa po natin na yung open forum po.
Yes.
To deepen our learning. Tapos sinabi mo dun sa assessment as learning po is parang asking question during the discussion. So,
depende sa Kathleen. Depende dun sa context ng pagtatanong. Okay, for example, yung example ko kanina, halimbawa, si estudyante tanong, Sir, did I just understand the concept right? The use of I statements. Okay, did I just understand the concept right when you said? Okay, the use of I statement is an example of assessment as learning. Ibig sabihin, ang assessment as learning may occur during or before, during, and even after discussing the lesson. Okay. Unlike formative, na mangyayari lang si formative before and during the discussion, and summative will only take place after discussing a certain lesson. Ang assessment as learning kasi is fluid siya. Okay, it's fluid. It may happen or it may take place anywhere or any part of the lesson, whether it's before discussing, during discussion, or even after discussion of the lesson. Okay, yung example ko kanina is we make use of a construct. We make use of a prompt. The use of I statements, okay, to check one's understanding of the concept is promotion of assessment as learning. Okay, Kathleen?
Yes, thank you po.
That's a good question. Yes, any more? Any more to ask question? Yeah, we listen first to Daphne muna before Princess. Daphne?
Sir, ang pagkakaintindi ko po kasi sa assessment is to measure student learning. Tapos, sir, ano po yung pinagkaiba nila sa grading po?
Yeah. To measure, diba sabi natin nung Daphne, ang sabi natin nung last meeting, assessment covers measurement, testing, non-tests, and test. Yun ang sinabi natin last meeting. Pag sinabi natin assessment, it covers measurement, tests, non-tests, and testing. Okay. Yung tanong mo kanina na anong pinagkaiba niya saan? Pinagkaiba niya sa assessment
grading,
saan?
sir.
Ay grading. Okay. Ang pinagkaiba ni assessment kay grading. Grading is measurement. Okay? Grading is measurement. Assessment is making use of the measurement, making use of the tests, non-tests, and testing for teachers to make decisions about student learning. Okay. So si assessment, broader siya, mas malawak ang kanyang sakop kaysa kay measurement. Please take note of this. All measurement activities are assessment activities, but not all assessment activities are measurement activities. Because if grades are not used to interpret or if grades are not used for teachers to decide on how they are supposed to teach learners, on how learners are supposed to learn appropriately, then measurement can never be considered as assessment. Merely it's a measure of learning, but not assessment of learning. Okay, halimbawa ganito. Sige, nilinawin pa natin. Nag-quiz ako halimbawa. Quiz is an example of measurement. Meron akong score. Measurement pa rin siya. Nakita ko yung score ko, that's measurement. Okay, out from 10, I only earn 5 out of 10. So 5 out of 10 is the measure of learning. But what does that 5 over 10 mean? And after identifying the meaning of 5 over 10, what will I do to the student? What will I do as a learner, having earned 5 over 10? Now, the answer to that question is what we mean by assessment. You create decisions out from the measure, okay? Out from the measure of your own progress, of your academic progress or learning achievement. That's the difference between measurement and that of assessment. Okay, Daphne?
Yes, sir. Gets ko na po, sir. Thank you.
So, ganun yun, no? Malawak ang sakop ni assessment. Okay, any more question?
Sir,
Yes, Princess.
Sir, considered po ba na assessment as learning yung iniisip ko na okay, mas natututo ako kapag nagsusulat ako habang nagdi-discuss si Sir, ganun po?
Yes, that's a concrete example of assessment as learning. Kasi you know how to learn. Okay, you know parang alam mo kung kailan ka best na matututo, alam mo kung kailan ka nagre-review ng tama. Okay, halimbawa, I'm aware that alam ko na kapag nakikinig ako sa conference namin, sa video conference namin, dapat merong background music kasi mas natututo ako, mas nare-relax ang pag-iisip ko kapag nakakarinig ako ng instrumental songs halimbawa habang nakikinig. Okay? And if you are doing that, okay, that is what we mean by self-assessment. That is what we mean by promotion of metacognitive skill. Okay? That's a perfect example, Princess. Okay, klaro yung pagkakaiba ng tatlo?
Sir,
Yes, Shantana.
Sir, bali po is yung assessment for learning na formative. Nagbibigay yung teachers ng feedback.
Yeah.
Through sir, parang sila yung kumukuha ng data from students since sila yung nagpo-provide ng assessments. While sa assessment as learning ba, sir, is yung students yung voluntary na nagbibigay ng data para ma-assess ng teachers para makapagbigay sila ng feedback to improve.
Yeah, that's also one way of doing self-assessment. For example, you ask learners to share, their learning styles to teachers so that teachers would know, the appropriate strategies that he or she would employ for student learning. The input provided by the learners as regards their learning styles are examples of self-assessment. Okay?
Okay po, sir. Thank you.
So yung pagkaiba ng tatlo. Usually talaga nakakalimutan yung self-assessment. Yes, who's that? I think si yes.
Sir, dun po.
Yes, Crystal. Crystal.
Dun po sa metacognitive
metacognition, sir.
Oo.
Pwede po siya magfo-fall sa modular, sir, which is sa self-learning po. Kasi
Yeah, pwede.
meron yung mga essay, ganun po.
Hindi, depende sa purpose natin po. For example, doon sa modular approach, doon sa modular learning, may mga tanong doon na kailangan gawin into essay. Essay is not an example of activity that promotes self-learning, that promotes self-assessment. Okay? It may be self-learning, but not self-assessment. Because self-assessment is about assessing. Okay? It's assessing your own skill. Okay? Assessing your own skill so that you would know what to do next. Okay? Again, self-assessment can never be graded. Hindi nag-gradean ang self-assessment. Okay? Hindi nag-gradean ang self-assessment maliban sa highly self-reflective courses like CFED. Okay? Like Christian Formation Education, because highly reflective course yan na kailangan talaga ng reflection session. Okay? But for other subjects, ang self-assessment ay hindi kailanman nag-gradean. Usually, ang self-assessment ay ginagawa lamang ng mga mag-aaral sa pansarili nilang kagamitan. Okay? Para makita nila, maunawaan nila ang kanilang mga sarili kung paano matuto. Okay? Kung paano matuto na mag-isa. Halimbawa, ganito metacognition. Modular learner ka. At kapag inaaral mo ang module, habang nakikinig sa musika, dahil yun ang the best way for you to learn the module, the content of the module, then that would mean that you could be able to assess yourself when it comes to learning style, when it comes to the time when you best learn. Okay? Yun ang tinatawag natin assessment as learning.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Yes, Joshua?
Sure. Self-assessment po ba yung when the student correcting the teacher na mali yung pagka-solve niya sa isang equation?
Yung estudyante, kinorek yung teacher kasi mali yung pagka-solve ng teacher sa equation.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
That's another form of self-assessment. Ibig sabihin yung estudyante ay very, very engaged in the lesson. And because he's engaged in the lesson, okay, he could clearly assess by himself whether the things being taught is right or wrong. Kaya nga dapat ang mga teachers, matuwa sila kapag chine-check ng estudyante yung gawa nila. At kapag nakikita ng estudyante yung mali nila. Because that's one way that we are forming independent learners. Okay? Okay, any more? Jerome, sabi ni Jerome, Sir, will you provide multiple assessment formats from which students may choose? What do you mean by Jerome? What do you mean by multiple assessment formats?
Sir, gaya po pag may nagpapa-excuse na students, sir, then nagpa-quiz ka, sir, ganun.
Tapos?
Can you allow na the same quiz or iba po? Ganun. Tapos
What's the definition of multiple assessment formats?
Gaya po, sir, ng kunyari pagiging fair sa students sa pagbibigay ng topic or mga assessment din po. Okay.
When you say multiple assessment formats, we're referring to the use of different types of assessment. Okay? For example, certainly, for example, nagpa-special quiz ka, na-miss niya ang quiz. So, ibig mong sabihin is, hindi necessarily na ibibigay ko yung the same quiz format or assessment format na binigay ko, but another type of assessment format. For example, magpa-essay ka instead of objective test type, magpa-alternative response ka instead of multiple choice. Okay? Yeah, we can do that. Okay, but in a major exam, there's multiple assessment format. We are referring to varied test types, no? Here. Tama ba, Jerome? Are you referring to varied test types? Kasi ang definition ng multiple assessment formats ganito, I did this in readings in Philippine history. What I did is, I didn't ask my learners of a common requirement, but I asked them to propose a requirement for that their team will submit to me as their final requirement. That's an example of multiple assessment format. You freely allow students to decide for the kind of requirement, for the kind of culminating activity or culminating learning task that they need to submit about the course or about the subject. That is a perfect example of multiple assessment format. Pero pag yung sinasabi mo kanina, that's not a assessment format but particularly types of test, varied types of test. Magkaiba po yung dalawa. A varied type of test is different from multiple assessment format. Because when we say varied types of tests, we are just referring to written tests or traditional forms of tests, pencil and paper test. Okay, but when you say multiple assessment formats, we're referring to other means on how to look into students' learning progress. Jerome?
Okay, sir, bali saan po siya mag-fall under dun sa 3 na principle po? 3 na
Multiple, yung multiple assessment format.
Yes, sir.
Saan siya magfo-fall?
Yes, sir.
Certainly multiple assessment format is another term when you make use of these 3-part assessment model. Ito kasi is parang what you're referring about multiple assessment format is a type of assessment format based on the quantity of assessment that are used by the teacher. Pag sinabi naman nating assessment for, assessment as, and assessment for, assessment of, these are assessments, types of assessments according to purpose. Magkakaiba kasi yan. Multiple assessment is a type of assessment depending on the frequency or quantity of assessments used in class. Assessment as, for, and of, okay, are types of assessment based on the purpose why you use the assessment. Okay. Multiple choice, alternative response, simple recall. These are varied types of tests. So magkakaiba iyon. So we cannot equate, okay, again, we cannot equate multiple assessment format with that of three-part assessment model. Because the 3-part assessment model has been classified according to the purpose why you are using the assessment strategy. Multiple assessment format or single assessment format are types of assessment based on the frequency or quantity of assessment we use in class or number of assessments we use in class. Kapag gumamit ka halimbawa ng assessment for learning while using assessment of learning or even assessment as learning, then automatically that's a multiple assessment format. If you only make use of assessment for learning, if you only make use of assessment of learning, but not for us and not for, then meaning to say you're just making use of single assessment format. Okay, Jerome, clear?
Okay, sir, thank you po.
So we cannot equate the two, no? So ang ano kasi nila ang reference kasi nung the reference ng assessment 3-part model, a 3-part assessment model and that of multiple assessment, okay, ay magkaiba ang kanilang reference. I think assessment is a give and take paradigm for teachers and learners. Teachers employ different assessments to gather information from the learners. Learners take these assessments to increase their learning experience or to improve. Teachers are learning in such a way that they could improve their teaching style. Yeah, we made mention of this last meeting. Learners can also improve their learning studies through assessment. Just a thought. Yeah, we shared this last meeting, Mar, when we said that the real purpose of assessment is not only for learners to improve the way they learn, but also for teachers to improve the way they teach. Because we said in our previous discussion in outcomes-based education that the real measure of teaching is learning. Nothing has been taught if nothing has been learned. And what is between teaching and learning? It's assessment. Kumbaga sa tinapay mga kapatid, etong sa sandwich, ito ay si teacher at ito ay si estudyante. Ang gitna ng teacher at ng estudyante ay ang palaman. At ang palaman ay itong assessment. Because assessment will improve the taste of both the teacher and the learner. Okay? So alin na nagpapaganda sa assessment, ang nagpapaganda at nagpapabuti o nagbibigay ng katuturan ng assessment, ang nagbibigay ng katuturan ng pagkatuto at pagtuturo ay yung pagtatasa na ginagawa natin sa loob ng ating silid-aralan. Malinaw po yung analogy ko? Malinaw ba yung analogy? O kahit man lang may magsabi ng yes kung naunawaan yung analogy ko.
Absolutely.
Oo. Thank you, Mar, for always responding. Siguro sobrang lakas ng internet mo. Yung iba siguro sobrang hina ng internet nila. Okay, maliwanag po yun, ha? Okay, ulitin ko. Ito si teaching, ito si learning. Lagyan natin ng palaman para ma-improve yung taste ni teaching, ma-improve yung taste ni learning, at yung palaman na tinatawag natin ay tinatawag nating assessment. Okay? It improves both teaching and learning. Yes, Bernadette?
Ay, tanong po ako. Self-assessment din po ba yung yung kapag yung estudyante is palaging nagtatanong tungkol sa lesson kapag hindi naiintindihan or mga curiosity niya po? Self-assessment?
Yeah,
Yung ganun din?
yeah, that's still a type of assessment. Yes, that's still a type of assessment.
Okay.
That's self-assessment.
Thank you.
Any more question, clarification before we proceed?
Sir, may tanong ako, sir.
Yes, Catherine.
Sir, matagal ko nang tanong to, sir. Sir, paano po yung mga OB, sir? Dati po kasi may isa akong classmate na halos buong pwedeng say excuse po siya, tapos exempted siya sa lahat ng assessment. Bakit po inaalaw yun? Hindi po ba unfair yun sa mga ibang estudyante?
Buong OB siya sa buong?
Prelims po. Or hindi naman po, parang kalahati lang po, kalahating yun.
Yeah, kapag OB, certainly the student cannot be excused from taking the test pag major exam. Kailangan pa rin niya mag-major exam. Pero sa policy kasi ng school, kapag OB ka at yung activity na tandaan is sanctioned by the school, okay, you are exempted. Ibig sabihin ng exemption nito, Catherine, ay it's a decision of the student. Okay, it's a decision of the student whether to get the highest score from the class or to retake. Okay, to retake the quiz or the assessment task. Decision yun nung bata kasi privilege niya yun. Okay, privilege ng bata as per policy of the school kasi nga itong bata ay nag-attend ng isang school sanctioned activity. And that's only one way for schools to motivate students to also cater to their other needs, not only their academic needs, but other types of development in school. For example, leadership development, journalistic development, and other talent development opportunities, not only for academics. Dito pumapasok yung value ng self-learning. Okay, dito pumapasok yung value ng assessment as learning. Na kahit exempted ako from taking the quiz or taking the assessment task, kapag yung bata meron na imbibe sa kanya yung value ng assessment as learning, gagawa siya ng paraan para matuto pa rin. Kahit na exempted siya na kunin o gawin yung test. Okay, Catherine?
Okay po, sir. Salamat po.
Doon ang value ng assessment as learning. Okay, any more concern? Yeah, okay, this is a good discussion again because you have plenty of sharing. Okay, now for your learning takeaway, okay, those who were not able to recite, okay, for today's video conference, the following students shared, okay, their shared or asked questions. We have Manzano, we have Jomel, we have Tal Urbano, Joshua Margado, Jude Abuan, Dayan Dayag, Dian Langkay, Dian ba? Dayan, should I say? Dayan. Sorry. Daphne, should I say? Daphne, sorry. It has to be Daphne. Daphne, we have Kathleen Villanueva, we have Mar Mora, we have 13 ba? Sorry. Ngayon pala is 14. Those who have shared are the following, should I say. Princess Pulintan, Mar Mora, Bernadette Foronda, Dayan Dayag, Joshua Morgado, Jennifer Dulin, Jomel Maborang, Jude, we have Cesar May, we have Kathleen, we have Daphne, we also have Dulin, tama? Dulin, we have Princess, we have Foronda, we have Shantana, we have Cristel Urbano, and Catherine Manzano. So ito po yung mga nag-share ngayong araw. Those who did not share, please make use of the chat box, okay, to share your learning takeaway. We still have 8 minutes left. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to include. We have Jerome Akain also. Okay, then the others who failed to share, please make use of the chat box. While we are waiting for them to share in the chat box, Jennifer Dulin, nabanggit ko ba si Jennifer? Yeah,
Yes, sir, nabanggit ko.
Okay, yung mga hindi nabanggit, please make use of the chat box to share your learning takeaway. So I hope that with our initial discussion as regards assessment, okay, you have a bit partially understood, okay, the differences of assessment of, as, and for learning. Ito pa yung while we are waiting for the learning takeaway. Ito pa yung pagkakaiba ng assessment as and assessment for. Assessment for and assessment of. Assessment for, kapag garden analogy yung gamitin natin, garden analogy. Kapag dinidiligan mo, when you water the plants, you provide sunlight for the plants, you provide fertilizer for the plant, okay? This is what we mean by assessment for learning. Because you are providing everything for that plant to grow well, okay? To grow robust. Okay? That is what we mean by assessment for learning. Okay. Assessment of learning is kapag sinukat mo yung diameter ng stem, kapag sinukat mo yung of learning, kapag sinukat mo yung height ng plant, kapag tinignan mo kapag tignan mo yung kulay ng dahon ng plant, that is an example of assessment of learning. May effect ba yung ginawang pagdidilig, yung ginawang pagbibigay ng abono, yung ginawang pagbibigay ng sunlight, yung ginawang pagtitrim, yung ginawang pagwiwid, may epekto ba siya? Tumaas ba, lumaki ba ang halaman? That is what we mean by assessment of learning. Okay. Halimbawa, nagpa-exercises ka, drills, recitation, and others. Okay? These are all examples of formative assessment. Itong mga ito ba ay nakatulong para makakuha ng mataas na score ang bata sa quiz? This is an example of assessment of learning. Okay. Okay, maliwanag ho ba yung garden analogy ng assessment of versus assessment for learning?
Yes, sir.
Sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, very good.
Sir. Sir, prelims exam is fast approaching, right?
Yes, the prelim exam will be on September 23, 24, and 25.
Oh my goodness.
I reviewed the lessons we have. I think the coverage of the exam will only until the coverage of exam is only up to lesson 2 natin. Hanggang lesson 2 lang pala siya. So kaya pa nating mahabol. So next meeting, that is Monday, we will continue our discussion. Then I'll discuss to you your assessment, your worksheet to complete in this lesson 2. Okay. Then after the worksheet, next week also is your quiz. After we discuss everything. I'll pause the ano na lang. Paano kaya yun? Okay, I think I have to open the assessment. I'll give the assessment later na lang yung worksheet. Tapos pag-aralan ninyo, then you have to ask me questions the next time on how to do it. Okay, para magabayan kayo kung paano niyo gagawin yung assessment timeline. Okay, so Ian, Rochelle, may pahabol si Rochelle Gumabay. Tapos na tayo. Rochelle, mag-share ka na lang learning takeaway mo. I'll answer your question next meeting. O sige, uwi na kayo, Dayan. Okay, sige. So we're done with the sharing. May we have then our closing prayer now, and may we listen to Jude to lead us the closing prayer. Jude, please.
All together we say, in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, Lord, for another successful class. We thank you for our teacher who have shared their time and expertise with us. We are blessed that in spite of the pandemic, we are able to learn and meet one another online. Thank you for providing a means for us to study through the use of technology. All of these things are not possible without you. May you continue to bless us with your divine wisdom so we could continue to learn while healing. Grant all those who are sick to get well again and those who are well to stay that way. Grant that we could be able to continue learning successfully. May you bless all those who had made this class possible, teachers and everyone who have contributed to the success of our learning process. We ask all this in your mighty name. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you for the beautiful prayer, Jude. And see you again next meeting. I hope that you have learned something in our today's conference.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye po.
Magpalo.
Maraming
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.